Hello, Andrew.
Everett.
Hey.
Secher here.
Oh my, isn't this a treat to be together tonight?
Wow, how good to see you.
And you,
wow.
I'm not in ideal circumstances, but I'm here.
Well, you're better than I've seen you in years.
You haven't seen me in years. Not much of a standard anyway. Here we are.
Here we are on this occasion. Wow.
Yes, indeed. Indeed.
Where are you, while we're waiting, where are you living?
We are living in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. And then the last 4 years, we've gone down to Sarasota during the winter. And we were on our way down there when I had this fall and then a triple fracture in my hip joint. So, so I am confined for a while.
Oh, dear.
Yeah.
Are you healing?
I hope.
Great.
I trust so. But
he better be. This is
You-
Mary. He better be here.
Mary, it's Allen Secher.
Hi, Ellen. I'm poking my head in there.
Now, where are you located? In Montana?
In Montana, in the hills of Montana. I'm the Yiddisher cowboy.
Guys, this is Avi speaking. You can't steal all my best lines from my introduction of you two. So we're going to get started.
I got it.
We should be on mute.
I want to welcome everybody to night number 5 of the Dresner Shiva. If you missed the funeral or if you missed any of the previous nights, everything is available on the Temple Beth Tikva, New Jersey website, and you can get all of it there before you binge watch on Netflix. It's available there. So tonight is really an all-star lineup in every sense of the word, and I'm thrilled that we have who we have speaking and who we have leading the service. So I'm going to just explain how things are going to work, and then we'll get started. But every night we've had a different service leader. The Dresner family has been blessed to have so many rabbis in our circle. And tonight we're welcoming the newest of those rabbis into our circle, Rabbi Lorge, who is one of the rabbis at Central Synagogue in New York City. For those of you who read the forward article and saw the video, you saw the very moving tribute that Central did for our dad there a little bit over a month ago, where he got his final aliyah to the Torah. And Angela Buchdahl, the senior rabbi of Central Synagogue, was gracious enough to give him and to give our whole family that evening. And Lorge, whom I did not know prior to that night, delivered what I would consider the most personally meaningful and relevant sermon that I have ever heard. And as the son of Rabbi Israel Dresner, and having heard thousands of sermons in my life, that's saying something. And I think that sermon is probably accessible on the Central Synagogue website. Ari, yes, no, yes. I believe it was December 10th was that night, I'm pretty sure. I won't tell you what it was because I don't want to take the time, but I just want to say that it spoke very immediately to what my sister Tamar and I were feeling and experiencing vis-a-vis our dad that night. And I reached out to Ari afterwards which started a bit of an epistolary bromance, which culminated actually in Ari being my chief advisor when it came to doing the Vidui confessional prayer for the dying, which I was privileged enough to do with and for my father. And I would not have been able to do that without Ari's help. And so he facilitated a crucial moment in the Dresner family journey, and I will forever be grateful to him for that and for agreeing to lead us tonight. So I'm going to turn things over to Rabbi Lorge at this point, and then I will join you at the tail end of the service to introduce our speakers for this evening. So Rabbi Lorge, please.
I want to thank you for that incredibly gracious welcome. And while I was new to you that evening, your family was not new to me. As a rabbi ordained on the Cincinnati campus of Hebrew Union College, where the American Jewish Archives exists, I had spent a long time in my studies looking at the rabbis who had been instrumental in the civil rights movement. And so when Rabbi Buchdahl told me that Rabbi Dresner was coming, I said, "Rabbi Israel Dresner?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Oh my goodness, we really are going to have a giant with us that night." And it is a privilege to get to pay tribute to his memory tonight as we mark Shiva together. I'm going to share my screen, hopefully successfully. We rabbis have been thrust into all kinds of new technological worlds that were not known to us prior to this pandemic, but you should hopefully be seeing my screen where we'll go through the service together. Nessa Rappaport, Jewish leader, wrote something that I think really captures Shiva beautifully. She said, "Loss steals language and you have nothing to say, but a loving community buttresses you, feeding you, telling you when to stand and sit, thrusting into your slack hand a prayer book." And that's what Shiva is about. It's about a community coming to strengthen, support, and sustain mourners who are in our midst. And that's why we've gathered tonight. And so as a guest in this community, I would just say to all of you from Temple Beth Tikva who have lost your Rabbi Emeritus, that we, the wider community who was so blessed by Rabbi Dresner's works, we stand with you. And we too will be a part of being keepers of his memory. But to you, Rabbi Dresner's family who mourn him most keenly, I want you all to know that while we've been gathering virtually for Shiva, there's nothing virtual about our care and support for you. That on each of these screens, we represent hugs and consoling words and listening ears and bearers of stories, and that we are ready to stand with you, to sit with you, to feed you, to buttress you as your loving community. Now, while Shiva includes time for sacred schmoozing, which we will, as Avi said, have time for later tonight, we also take time to recite these traditional prayers in the hopes that this family, who has been all too acquainted with some of God's harsher aspects of life and death, will now come close to God's reservoirs of comfort and love. And so we turn to those words now. I also know we're a community made up of different communities, so I'm going to invite you to stand and sit according to your own customs. I already noticed some variation from night to night, so please do what is customary for you. We'll start with this text from Psalms. Esa einai el heharim, me'ayin yavo Ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai, oseh shamayim va'aretz. I lift my eyes up to the mountain, and where will my help come? My help will come from Adonai, who makes the heavens and the earth. We continue with Baruch Hu, our call to worship. ברכו את אדוני המבורך, ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר בדברו מעריב ערבים, בחוכמה פותח שערים, ובתבונה משנה עתים, ומחליף את הזמנים, ומסדר את הכוכבים במשמרתיהם ברקיע כרצונו. בורא יום ולילה, גולל אור מפני חושך, וחושך מפני אור. ומעביר יום ומביא לילה, ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני צבאות שמו, אל חי וקיים, תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני, המעריב ערבים. If you want to join me in reading the English in front of you, unending is your love for your people, the house of Israel. Torah and mitzvot, laws and precepts you have taught us. Therefore, O God, when we lie down and when we rise up, we will meditate on your laws and rejoice in your Torah and mitzvot forever. Day and night we will reflect on them, for they are our life and the length of our days. Then your love shall never depart from our hearts. Baruch ata Adonai, Ohev Amo Yisrael. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Vaed. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol me'odecha ve'hayu ha'devarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta ba'am v'shiftecha b'veitecha uvlechtecha v'derech uv'shochbecha uv'kumecha וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. We continue with our song of redemption, recalling these words that the Israelites sang as they marched to freedom. Mi chamocha Ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha, nedar ba'kodesh, nora tehilot, osef eleh, nora tehilot, osef eleh. מלכותך רב בניך, בוקע ים לפני משה ומרים, זה לי אנו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. ונאמר כי פדה אדוני את יעקב, וגואלו מיד חזק ממנו, ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום, לשלום, והעמידנו מלכנו לחיים, ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך, ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך. Amen. Join me if you'd like in the English. Shield us from hatred and plague. Keep us from war and famine and anguish. Subdue our inclination to evil. O God, our guardian and helper, our gracious and merciful ruler, give us refuge in the shadow of your wings. Guard our coming and our going, that now and always we have life and peace. Baruch atah Adonai, shomer amo Yisrael le'ad. We continue with the brachot, the blessings of the Amidah. Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi yagid tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, ve'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, ve'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, גומל חסדים טובים וקונה הכל וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות ומביא גאולה לפני בניהם למען שמו באהבה מלך חוזר ומושיע ומגן ברוך אתה אדוני מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני מחיי הכל אתה רב להושיע, משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר, מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומידו מלך מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה ונאמן אתה להחיות הכל ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי הכל אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש וקדושים בכל יום יהלוך הסלע Baruch atah Adonai, Ha'el HaKadosh. We'll take a few moments now to continue in silence. If you have a prayer book in front of you, you can continue through the words of the Amidah, or each of us can take a moment for our own personal prayers, reflections, and meditations. Yehiyu leratzon imrefi vehegyon libi lefanecha Adonai tzuri vegoali tzuri vegoali. As we turn to the memorial prayers of a Shiva Minyan, I'd share these words that Joshua Loth Liebman wrote. He said that Judaism can teach us how to understand the goal of life in the presence of mortality. That goal is to create a pattern that will be a blessing and inspiration to those who come after us. And I think it's a beautiful encapsulation of one of the purposes Judaism lays out to us for the lives that we have, to create these blessed patterns that would inspire those who come next. And Rabbi Dresner left many patterns. His public work, his dedication to the creating of a better world, a beloved community, is a blueprint that all of us inherit. But so too, he leaves to his family even more patterns, gifts that they can use to discern how they wish to act as they walk life's road, now no longer beside him, but with his eternal memory before them. We pray that the blessed patterns of Rabbi Dresner's life endure. May we tend to those remembrances, and may they stir and inspire us. Psalm 23. We read together. A psalm of David. Adonai is my shepherd, I shall not want. God maketh me to lie down in green pastures, leadeth me beside the still waters. God restoreth my soul. You guideth me in straight paths for your name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of Adonai forever. We continue with our memorial prayer, El Malei Rachamim, praying to a good and compassionate God to vouchsafe the soul of our dear one forever. I'll invite you to rise, please. El Malei Rachamim, Shochen B'Meromim, Hamsei Menucha Nechona Al Kanfei HaShechina, Im Kedoshim U'Tehorim, Kezohar Harakia Masirim, Et Nishmat Harav Yisrael Shmuel Ben Avram V'Tamar, Shahalach Le'olamo. Baal Harachamim Yastirehu B'Seter Knefav Le'olamim, V'yitzru B'Tzrur HaChaim Et Nishmato. Adonai Hu Nachalato, Ve'anuach B'Shalom Al Mishkavo, Ve'nomar Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to our Rabbi and our teacher, Israel Dresner, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. For you, O God, are his inheritance. May he rest in peace, and let us all say together, Amen. As we prepare to recite Kaddish together, I'd share these words by Rabbi Harold Schulweis that I think capture a sentiment that might be similar. Mourn me not with tears, ashes, or sackcloth, nor dwell in darkness, sadness, or remorse. My own mortality, if there be such for me, is not in tears, blame, or self-recrimination, but in the joy you give to others, in raising the fallen and loosening the fetters of the bound. In your loyalty to God's special children, the widow, the orphan, the poor, the stranger in your gates, the weak, I take pride. Honor me with laughter and with goodness. With these, the better part of me lives on beyond the grave. And so we turn to words of Kaddish Yatom, mourner's Kaddish, praising God and thanking God for having vouchsafed this beloved man to us, this incredible teacher of Torah. We'll be led by our mourners as we say, Yud Kadal, Yud Kadal. Amen.
בחייכון וביום גיחון ובחיי בכל בית ישראל. בגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן.
Amen.
שמי רבה מברך לעולם ועמי עמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא. ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי בקדושה בריחו. ואלה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה. תושבחתה ונחמתה. תאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומך, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן.
עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו amen. And so we say to the mourners in our midst, Hamakom yinachem etchem b'toch sha'ar avalei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. May God comfort you among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. This concludes our service.
Thank you, Rabbi Lorge, for that beautiful service. We really appreciate it. We're going to shift gears now, and we're going, before I introduce our first speaker, we're going to have a very special guest doing a very special reading for us, Rabbi Everett Gendler. And I want to acknowledge not only Rabbi Gendler and his wife, but his kids are here, Tamar and Naomi, his niece, Emily Loeb, whom I actually know the best of that generation of the Gendler family. Everett and I are members of the same shul here in the Berkshires in Massachusetts, Hevra of Southern Berkshire. Rabbi Gordon led last night's service. She's one of the two rabbis there, for those of you who were here last night. And I really, there's so many things that I could say about Rabbi Gendler. So the thing that strikes me the most is how similar he and my dad are, and yet how different. Their civil rights resumes are unimpeachable. They arrived at the same end by totally different means. Everett was from a small town in Iowa. My dad was from the heart of the Jewish Lower East Side of Manhattan. They met each other first as students before rabbinical school at the University of Chicago, where they were both studying. My dad had to choose between HUC and JTS. He chose HUC. Everett chose JTS. And my dad would always say that Everett beat him to just about every punch when it came to being on the right side of the issue and doing what was right. Everybody always thought my dad was the first one to speak out against fill in the blank. And my dad was very quick to point out that Everett beat him every single time. Everett got involved in the civil rights movement, I believe, in the mid-1950s. My dad only came to it in the early 1960s. Everett was outspoken immediately against Vietnam. Everett was probably minute one or second one. My dad, it probably took a day or two. Same thing with the occupied territories in Israel. And they did it in totally, their activism was diametrically opposed. My dad was big and brash and out in front. I'll even say a little bit arrogant, maybe egotistical. Everett, self-effacing, 180 degrees the opposite of my dad in his demeanor. If you Google Rabbi Everett Gendler, one of the first things you'll see is a picture of him with the Dalai Lama. And I think that tells you everything you need to know. I think Everett has been with the Dalai Lama upwards of a dozen times. I believe the Dalai Lama refers to Everett as the rabbi. And Everett was involved in all sorts of issues that weren't even on my dad's radar, like Jewish environmentalism. I believe Everett was responsible for the first solar-powered Ner Tamid, the eternal flame that we have over the Ark in synagogues in the world. I think the most environmental thing my dad ever did was never buy anything new unless we forced him to buy something new. So Everett was way ahead on that as well. And I could go on and on, but I think that gives you an idea of the man and the mensch that we are about to hear from. And Everett is actually zooming in with, after having received extensive Zoom lessons from his daughters and dress rehearsals, and you've done a beautiful job. And I also want to say that he's at a rehabilitation center because he broke his hip. And Everett is joining us from that rehab center in Great Barrington, Mass. And I want to say a refuah shlema to you. And I'm sure everyone here joins me in saying that. And without further ado, you have something to say to us and we want to hear it. So I will mute myself.
I unmuted you.
Oh, thank you so much. What a gracious, loving introduction. And you know, the issue of who's on first, who got there first, trivial compared to the substance of the issues. So your father need not worry about being second. He's still, from many perspectives, numero uno. I'd like to begin by suggesting that Psy's linguistic accomplishments go beyond simply the fact that English he knew, Hebrew he knew, and Yiddish he knew. That itself would be distinction enough. But Psy, in his exercise of any of those languages, had nuances, subtleties that augmented the language. He was not particularly eloquent like King. None of us was, none of us is. But Psy could be invitational, he could incite, he could be propositional, he could be propulsive. And I'd like to illustrate this by a phone call I still remember vividly, early August 1962. I had, it seemed to me, ended up joining the rabbinate to see the world, who needed the Navy. So my first few years, I served congregations in Mexico City, worked with, as an associate with the World Union congregation in Rio de Janeiro, spent a couple of months in Castro's Cuba, 68, 69. And now here I am, and Wolf Kelman has placed me with the Jewish Center of Princeton. The phone rings at a mercilessly early hour on a Sunday morning. And this is Psy. All I wanted to do was turn over on my sleeping bag. I was sleeping on the floor. None of my furniture had arrived, nothing. I was just moving in. So I said, you know, Dr. King has run into some impediments in Albany, Georgia. And Chief, Lori Pritchett is actually very proper in enforcing strictly, but without brutality, the various segregational laws. He said, and King feels that it might encourage the local populace and also draw national attention if a few northern clergy came down and lent their voices and their bodies to our efforts. Oi, sigh, I say, you know, it's not so easy. I explained my circumstances, and even as I was talking, I could hear myself echoing what I'm sure your father would have said. You know what? Emergencies are never convenient. And the question is always, do we respond, convenient or not? Or do we take refuge, perhaps not invalidly, in the great inconvenience and problems in relation to our own particular lives? At which point I said, so Sai, look, I haven't met the congregation. I'm leading my first service this Friday night. There's a baby naming. He said, don't worry, you'll fly down tomorrow. Demonstration will be on Tuesday. You'll be back home on Wednesday. Not to worry. I succumbed, of course, to this sweet reassurance. And I'll spare you details of the whole adventure or misadventure, but let's say it did not go quite as scheduled. And so the demonstration was Wednesday, not Tuesday. And the demonstration did not go quite as anticipated. And instead of having our prayer vigil and then dispersing, as we began our prayer vigil, we were dispersed by the local police and with a whole array of vans waiting for us. And we were taken to the Albany courthouse, arraigned, re-segregated, and then put on buses for lodging at either the Lee or County or Terrell County stockades, where they formerly had housed chain gangs. I won't try to read you the AAA rating of the accommodation. Anyway, we were on a hunger strike, and so it happened that Friday night, someone else led the service and someone else led the baby naming. And my inauguration at Princeton was both a little late, but also perhaps enhanced by the fact that the day before I was to lead the service, the Princeton Packet, rather than announcing this inaugural service, had the headline, Princeton Rabbi Jailed in Georgia. So you never know what comes, but I'm forever grateful to Sai for that nudge And obviously I remained involved, and I was in regular contact with a really bright, able, close assistant of Dr. King, Andrew Young, and which led just a few months later to 19 of us rabbis at the Rabbinical Assembly going down officially as representatives of the Rabbinical Assembly. That was at the time of the fire hose and the police dogs, and down we went. So let me conclude by saying that I'd like to give you a very brief sense of what it is about King that earned the loyalty, the devotion of so many of us, including my colleague Allen Secher later this evening, but hundreds, thousands. And I'll do it with just 5 brief sentences from a paragraph of a sermon by King. The greatness of our God lies in the fact that he is both tough-minded and tender-hearted. He has qualities both of austerity and gentleness. The Bible, always clear in stressing both attributes of God, expresses his tough-mindedness in his justice and wrath, and his tender-heartedness in his love and grace. That is very profound, and under different circumstances, I would try to expound it a bit, but no need. King exemplified that delicate act of balancing the tough-mindedness and the tender-heartedness. He had scathing criticisms, specific criticisms of the society, always balanced by the tender-heartedness that included the antagonist as partner in the ultimate solution and reconciliation. And a master practitioner of that is Andrew Young. One brief and final episode relating to him. I can remember at one point when we were going down when we were going down to Birmingham, that we flew into Atlanta, and I was walking through the corridor, wondering if Andrew Young would be in jail or if I'd get to see him. A few years later, I walked down the same corridor and I saw, "Welcome to Atlanta, Andrew J. Young, Mayor." That entails a balance of tough-mindedness and tender-heartedness that I'm sure we'll sense as we hear from Andrew. So thank you so much, Harry.
Everett, Rabbi Gendler, thank you. I should have just had you introduce Ambassador Young, but I'll do my best. Andrew Young has more titles and accomplishments in his resume than anybody I know. Just to tick off a few: Everett just told us about the mayor, obviously, of Atlanta, and really almost single-handedly responsible for bringing the Olympics to Atlanta at that point. Obviously, ambassador to Jimmy Carter. And he writes about that episode, which also involves the Jews, unfortunately, in this case, in his books. And if you have not read Andrew Young's books, the first thing you need to do when we get off now, tonight, is go get them, because I've read all of them. So An Easy Burden, A Way Out of No Way, Walk in My Shoes, which he wrote with his godson. These are books that if you want to understand American history, never mind the civil rights movement, and not only history, but where we're headed, there are policy ideas that he writes about 20 years ago that are way ahead of their time, that are just being implemented now. And so he's been a visionary and a prophet. And he's best known, of course, to this group, certainly for his work with Dr. King. He was the executive director of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and really King's right-hand man. And when he spoke about 6 years ago at the Rabbi Everett Gendler Tikkun Olam lecture series at Temple Beth Tikva, we had the privilege of having dinner with him beforehand in the synagogue social hall. And he was gracious enough to let everybody at the table ask him a question. And every single question had to do somehow with Dr. King or the civil rights movement, until we got to my sister, Tamar, whose question for Andrew Young was.
My question was, do you know Bono from U2? And Andy said, of course I know Bono. We've been all over Africa together. And I asked, was he cool? And Andy said, yeah, he was cool. I asked him how many U2 concerts he had been to. And Andy thought about it and he said, none. They've never invited me. And I said, I think you got to rectify that. I think you should talk to Bono. And Andy said, I will.
So Andy, when you speak, maybe you can update us on your U2 concert status. And also about your books, I know that you had offered your grandchildren $1,000 to any grandchild who would read one of your books. I think you said you only paid out once. You've paid out 3 times already. Excellent. Excellent. So that offer is not available to the people on this Zoom. So I'm sorry, it was only for his grandchildren. So I have the privilege of introducing now Ambassador Andrew Young.
Well, I've had the privilege of being friends of the Dresners. And I didn't come to them. In fact, I was just getting into Atlanta when Albany occurred. And I was really an employee of the of the United Church of Christ. And I was on their payroll because Martin didn't have a tax-exempt charter for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And in order to bring some voter registration and literacy education money into SCLC, I had to get it sent through the United Church of Christ. They sent me down to Atlanta as the administrator. But I was employed by the church, but we didn't know in 1961 how the 501c3 nonprofit charters would be applied to the movement. And so Dr. King said, you don't need to go to jail. You need to stay out and take care of me when I'm in jail. And so that always put me at a disadvantage with Cy Dresner, because he had been to jail at least 3 times before I had ever been arrested. So every time we meet, he said, hi, you been to jail yet? And I said, no. I said, my job is to send you to jail and pray for you. And my time will come soon. The truth of it is, in the entire time I was with Martin Luther King, I probably only I was arrested 3 times by accident. I wasn't supposed to be arrested. The police didn't know that. They just swept me up off the street. And as soon as I'd go to jail, Martin would get me out. Except when he was in jail in Albany. And I say this because Albany goes down in the history of the movement as a defeat. But it really was the place where the forces of goodwill, the people of conscience, were galvanized for the long haul. I think that later on, I was with Martin at the rabbinical conference in upstate New York. And the rabbis were no longer observers. They were no longer associates. They were a part of the movement. They saw this movement as a movement for justice. And they were always in the front row. And I think that Rabbi Dresner's conscience and his height, it sure doesn't hurt to be tall and good looking and to have a great big bass voice. But he commanded attention, he rallied people around him, but he always put people at ease. A testimony that I would like to make now in his memory, because he was largely responsible for me coming into Albany later on when Dr. King was in jail, and I had to go visit Martin in jail. And for me, it was harder getting in and out of jail as a visitor. And so when I walked into the jailhouse, there was this great big sergeant. And he must have weighed 275, 80 pounds. And I said, "Excuse me, sir, but I'd like to see Dr. King and Reverend Everett." And he never looked up. He said, "There's a little nigger out here that wants to see them big niggas back there. What do I do?" And somebody said, "Send him back." So I went back, but I was kind of flustered. And I told Dr. King what he said. He said, "Look, that's the least of my worries. That's your problem. I got problems in here, and you need to help me solve the problems in here. You deal with him on your own." Well, when I went back out after meeting with Martin and not getting any help from him, I looked at the sergeant's name, and it was Sergeant Hamilton. And I simply smiled and said, "Thank you very much, Sergeant Hamilton." And simply calling him by name, he jumped up. He said, "Oh, okay." The next day, I had to do this for almost 10 days that they were in jail. And the next day I went and I started out calling him Sergeant Hamilton. And I said, "You surely must have played football somewhere." And he said, "I went to Valdosta State and I was a tackle on that team in 1950, so and so and so and so. And so we got to talking about football. And when there was a break in the conversation, I said, "May I see Dr. King?" He said, "Yeah, go on back." But over the course of those 10 days, we really became friends. And I never talked about politics, but I talked about football. I talked about his children. I talked about, he was having religious problems, as was Sheriff, forget his name now, but it'll come to me. And he said, after 2 or 3 days, "You know, the sheriff would like to talk to you. Would you mind meeting with him?" And I went in and I actually was put in a counseling situation where and I'm getting old, my mind is slipping, but the sheriff
Laurie
had,
Pritchett.
Laurie Pritchett, thank you. Sheriff Pritchett said that he had just gotten married and his wife wanted him to go to church. And he didn't know about the church. And he wanted me to talk to him about his wife and his family. And finally he said, do you think that Dr. King could recommend me to Bobby Kennedy as a federal marshal? He said, I really don't like this work and I'd like to get out of it. If you could help me, I'd be forever grateful. Needless to say, we were not that close to Bobby Kennedy. In fact, he was one of the reasons that we were in jail, because he took out a federal injunction against us and we didn't want to break it, violate the federal injunction, and that's what killed the movement. So we were not on such good terms with him. But in that period in jail, the relationships, and when Dr. King got out of jail, they were almost sorry to see us go. Now, let me jump ahead 10 years or so. When I was ambassador to the UN, I went to one of these country clubs up in Maine and made a speech. And when I got through, this tall, skinny guy, couldn't have weighed more than 180 pounds, and came up to me in a green jacket and white flannel pants and white shoes. It looked like he just won the Augusta Golf Championship, and came up and shook my hand and said, that was a wonderful speech. He said, you don't know me, do you? I said, you don't remember me? I said, where did we meet? He said, the Albany jail. I'm Sergeant Hamilton. I said, well, I'll be damned. And I said, how did you get up here? He said, as soon as you all left, I saw an ad for a security guard here. And I put my family in our station wagon and we moved, and we haven't been back to Albany since. He said, I came to thank you for helping me to get my family free of all that we were bogged down in there. And he said, my kids now they're in all these good schools up here in New England. And he said, our life has changed, as obviously I've changed. And he said, it really wouldn't have happened. Now, about the same time he was leaving, Pritchett called me, put my name down to recommend him as a police chief for High Point, North Carolina. And I said, I don't know, but I think if given another chance, he might be different. And he actually integrated the police in North Carolina, and did a commendable job, but got in some trouble some other kind of way. But I'm saying that you have no idea what a religious presence means in the midst of darkness. Now, Martin did not want to go to Albany. He was tricked into going to Albany in the first place because he had been as close to death as he'd ever been when he was arrested in Atlanta and taken to the DeKalb County prison in the middle of the night. They put him in chains and put him in the back of a paddy wagon and drove him 400 miles down to state penitentiary. Well, he was just about 31 years old. And he was sure that this was his death. And he spent the night preparing to die, because this was a pattern where you take a young black man out of jail and you say he tried to escape, and you either shoot him or you throw him in the river. And he spent the night really preparing to die. And fortunately, he didn't. But I think the reason he didn't was, even though he was chained hand and foot, he was in the back of the paddy wagon with a German Shepherd. And every time he'd roll toward the German Shepherd in a curve, the German Shepherd would growl. Well, fortunately, he had a German Shepherd at home, so he was not afraid of dogs. But it was his keeping the dog calm, I think, that saved his life. And he came out of there realizing that death for him was inevitable, as it is for everybody. And one of his favorite joking sermons, which is quite appropriate for me right now, and most of us are getting, I'll be 90 in about 3 weeks, and 4 weeks, 5, I don't know what, but that he said, death is the ultimate democracy. He said, I don't care who you are, what color you are, how rich you are, how poor you are going to die. And he said, the only thing you have to say, you can't say when you die, how you die. The only thing you have amongst your choices is, what is it that's important enough that you're willing to give your life for? And I think that though we make fun of it now, and though we laugh and joke with each other about who went to jail first and who did what with whom, when, the truth of it is that the civil rights movement gave us all an opportunity to trust God. And we had to choose between God and mammon. And it was essentially a biblical choice that we didn't have a choice about whether we made it or not. You had a choice. Probably had a choice, because I could have escaped for a year or two. But the truth is that Rabbi Dresner was one of those who jumped up and grabbed this as an opportunity to serve God. And he was proud of it. And he enjoyed humiliating me, because I'd had the privilege of spending time in jail. In fact, I think he'd been to jail 3 times before I was arrested once. And every time we'd see each other, he'd say, "You been to jail yet, Andy?" He said, "It's a good experience. You ought to try it." I said, "Yeah, I know." But the heart of the rabbinate, and I think I also symbolize it with Rabbi Joshua Heschel, marching with Martin in the front row in Selma. And the expression, "I felt that my legs were praying," reminds us that the battle continues, and that I thought we would be able to take it easy now, but the very thing that we marched for in 61 and 64, 63 and 65, we had a terrible disappointment last night, where the Senate seemed not to understand what it means to be a representative of a democracy and to be one nation, indivisible under God. And I think that once again, we find ourselves looking to the hills from whence cometh our help. And our help cometh from the Lord who made heaven and earth. And I think that reading through the Psalms and sharing in the prayers and the laughs and the joy and the wisdom of the sons of Israel and daughters of Israel has been a backbone in my life. And I think it's a rock on which we must continue to build one nation indivisible under God, with liberty and justice for all. Sai gave his life for that. And we realize now that we still have a long way to go. So may God be with us and strengthen us and keep us and make his face to shine on us and be gracious unto us. Amen.
Amen, Andy. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
I can't thank you enough for really the ending, because if my dad were here, he would have done exactly what you just did. He would have reminded us that there's still work to be done. We cannot rest on our laurels. And I'll share now a story that I share often about my dad. When I would call him every week, twice a week, for our usual call on Sunday and Wednesday night, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I started the call by the way I always would, asking him how he was. And he answered, "Well, I haven't lost my sense of righteous indignation, so I guess I'm okay."
Good.
And the thing about Rabbi Dresner and the thing about you, Andy, is that you're still very, very much engaged with what is happening today. You haven't left the stage, and you shouldn't leave the stage. And your voice is needed more than ever with voting rights and with so many other things that are plaguing our country now. And I said to my sister recently, I'm thrilled that our father outlived the first Trump administration, and I'm glad he died before the prospect of a second one. We have to keep that from happening. And he would exhort us to do that tonight. So I just want to echo what you said, and how important this unfortunately still is in our country. You're muted, Andy. I don't know if you're
Freedom is a constant struggle, and we've struggled so long that we must be free. And we are freer in spirit and amongst friends and in our personal lives than we've ever could have been without the struggle politically. And so thank you and your father and your family for awakening me to the needs of my people, our people.
I want to share now that Andy is in fact part Jewish, and I do not say that tongue in cheek. He actually, I believe on his grandmother's side, had a Polish Jewish ancestor. Do I have that right, Andy?
That's right. My grandmother's maiden name was Czernowski. And
So,
I grew up in New Orleans, 50 yards from the headquarters of the Nazi Party. And my father was a dentist, and most of his suppliers happened to be Jewish. So as far back as 4 years old, I can remember the discussions in my daddy's dental office about trying to help me understand why they were hiling Hitler 50 yards from where I was born. So we've come a long way. Still got a long way to go, though. God bless you.
God bless you. Thank you. So before I turn to our next speaker, I just want to acknowledge another rabbi who is here amongst us. And if I'm doing the calculation correctly, it is 3 a.m. where he is. And that is Rabbi Arik Asherman. who was a student rabbi of my dad's in Wayne, New Jersey. And as much as Andy is still very much on the stage and my dad was very much on the stage, they also passed that torch and inspired others to continue in social justice work. And Rabbi Asherman is at the forefront of securing Palestinian rights in Israel, in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and at Rabbis for Human Rights and at his former organization, B'Tselem. And I would like to take some credit on behalf of my father for inspiring Rabbi Asherman to do the work that he does. And maybe we'll hear from him later on. And actually, Arik, I actually would like to, in front of everybody, extend the invitation for you to speak at the Shloshim, which will be at a normal human time for you. And Nomi Chazan is also going to be speaking, just so you know, so we'll have another speaker from Israel. But I want to acknowledge your presence here and the vital work that you do that was in part inspired by our dad, even if you took the nickname of Ariel Sharon and he never forgave you for that. So, okay. Our next speaker actually succeeded Rabbi Gendler in Mexico City. It's Rabbi Allen Secher, who is now, as I said last night and earlier, officially the most arrested and jailed rabbi during the civil rights movement with the passing of my dad. Again, to repeat, this is not how Allen would have wanted the honor. Nevertheless, it's his. He has the distinction of living in Whitefish, Montana. Where else would a Jew live in Montana but Whitefish? And one of his neighbors in town is the white supremacist Richard Spencer. I don't think they're bowling buddies, but Allen can tell us. I believe Allen's dog's name is Kugel. Do I have that right? We'll probably hear from Kugel in the background when Allen unmutes, so be ready for that. I interviewed Allen for the documentary and we had to keep retaking things because Kugel was barking. And Allen also has the distinction, in spite of the dog barking, I think, of being probably the most media savvy rabbi ever. I think he has 7 Emmy Awards, if I'm not mistaken, for his work in television. He was also on National Public Radio in Montana. And Allen he's like Cory Booker. He's a quote machine and a soundbite machine. Everything that comes out of his mouth is media perfect and media ready. So now that I've hyped him up with that, Allen, take it away.
I think my mother wrote that introduction. The connection here is Everett and I were both Albany, Georgia. And Everett, I did not realize till this very moment, I have a similar experience. I was starting out in my first congregation in Massapequa, Long Island, and had not yet done a service when I got the call from Cy Dresner, show up or else, okay? And there we were, Everett, you and me, and I did not realize, I didn't know at the time that we also have the experience of having been the rabbi in Mexico City. I came just a short period afterwards. I sent an email to Avi a couple of days ago to say I wanted to speak. Because I have a problem, Avi, with what we've been doing. But it's a good problem. It's not a bad problem. Cy has not gotten enough tribute. Not nearly. Okay? When we think of rabbis involved in the civil rights movement, Cy doesn't get that memento. Heschel gets it. Prince gets it. Eisendrath gets it. Cy Dresner is the rabbi of the civil rights movement. None of us, Everett and I are spirit carriers. But Cy, there ought to be enormous tributes to Cy Dresner right now. In the middle of the night last night, I kept on thinking, HUC ought to name the chapel after Cy Dresner, so that every single rabbi that comes into that chapel realizes what a brilliant leader Cy Dresner was. Cy Dresner was the piper of rabbis to participate in the civil rights movement. And not many of us did. I mean, it's nice to point out the few of us that did. Yes, there are lots of rabbis that do the talk, but there are very few who do the walk. And that's thanks to Cy Dresner. The Jewish community ought to be so grateful that he passed through our ranks. I love knowing that I knew Cy Dresner. I'm noticing that there are 93 screens lit right now. And every one of those 93 screens can say, Cy Dresner, I knew him, I cared for him, I loved him, but more important, I learned from him. And it ought to be that 100 years from now, Cy Dresner is still at the top of the list of those who influenced the civil rights movement. So my statement is really, thank God for Cy Dresner, a one of a kind, and boy, were we blessed. Now, Avi, I could tell the Ganuch story just to change. What do you think of? Should I tell it?
Far be it from me to tell a rabbi Ganug if he wants to tell the Ganug story. So,
Avi, me you could tell. I'd love to tell the Ganuch story because, Andy Young, this was in St. Augustine, not in Albany. We're at the church in St. Augustine, Florida, and King spoke and others spoke, and they gave us all kinds of inspiration, all kinds of direction. And then King said, and I would like my very good friend, Rabbi Israel Dresner, to speak a very few words. Now, all 93 of us on this call know what a very few words means for Israel Dresner. 5 minutes goes by, he's still at it. 10 minutes goes by, he's still at it. 15 minutes goes by, he's still at it. We get to 20 minutes, and finally, the 16 of us stand up and shout, Genucht, Genucht. 25 minutes goes by. 30. Genucht was not a word Cy Dresner understood. He was unique, but what an inspiration. I'm glad I knew him, and so are all 94 of us. I'm done.
Ganug. All right. Thank you, Alan. I look, on behalf of Tamar and the whole Dresner family, thank you for what you said. You know, one of the reasons that we're making the documentary, and one of the reasons we interviewed you, and one of the reasons we interviewed Andy and Everett, is really to make sure that that Dad does get his due. And I actually am happy to make an announcement tonight, which is hot off the press, literally and figuratively, that it appears that my dad's, one of his dying wishes is going to come true. And the New York Times is going to publish a news obituary, which is something that he very much wanted. And as I've said in a previous Shiva, Dad could have gone at any point at the, really from New Year's until when he actually died on the 13th. And each time somebody died, Tamar and I were like, oh no, this is going to be competition. He's not going to get the obituary. Betty White, no, that's no good. Desmond Tutu, no good.
Sidney
know,
Poitier.
Sidney Poitier, like he's got to hold on another, another little bit, another little bit, another little bit. I heard today, I still haven't heard from the Times themselves, but I heard today from Tovia Smith, the NPR correspondent who did that wonderful NPR story on Dad, that the Times, she has a friend in the Times obit department, and she told me that they're going to do a news obit on him. So
You have to explain the difference between a news obit and
I think everybody knows the difference, but fine. A news obit means that you don't pay to get your obituary. Anybody with money can get their obituary published in the New York Times, but they only cover you as a news obit if you were worthy of being covered. And my dad, our dad, was more than worthy of being covered, and he would also, being as parsimonious as he was, appreciate the fact that it will be written and we won't have to pay
It was
for it.
free.
Okay, so we're dangerously close to our 90-minute time limit. There is no Shiva tomorrow, because of Shabbat. So there will be a Shiva Motzei Shabbat Saturday evening, and then the final Shiva will be on Sunday night. If, however, somebody has something quick that they want to say, you can say it. Otherwise, avidresner7@gmail.com. I'll be happy to read what you have to say, but I know people have things to do and places to be, so I want to be respectful of our 90-minute time limit. But Alice, are you waving goodbye or saying you want to speak? You're muted, Alice. We can't hear you.
It dawned on me that I think, or I imagined it, that you guys were related to the Dresner's restaurant on the Upper East Side. Is that true?
Yeah, so our dad's uncle, Louis, was the
His
founder
brother.
of Dresner's restaurant.
Brother,
And our dad's,
Uncle.
yeah, uncle. My wife, Natasha's just showing me this matchbook from there. But it was dad's Uncle Louis. His father and Uncle Louis were brothers, and then Uncle Louis sold it to Uncle Max, and Uncle Max, as fate would have it, actually sold it to a family from Wayne, New Jersey. So
Oh,
it
right,
actually
now that,
had
okay, that comes, yeah, okay, I kind of
dead
remember.
in his family.
Abba worked there.
Abba worked there a little bit, I think, when he was younger. And Dresner's lasted for almost 100 years. It only closed about 3 or 4 years ago.
Who did they sell it to?
I have no idea. Anyway, so does anybody have something quick that they want to share? If so, you can make yourselves known to Dawn in the chat, the Temple Beth Tikva in the chat.
Is Dawn on?
I think Dawn's there, yeah. But if you've spoken
I'm here.
already, oh, okay, thank you, Dawn. So you can send a chat to Dawn, but if you've spoken already, one of the other Shivot, try not to speak again. And if nobody wants to speak, that's fine.
this is cousin Jonah from New York.
Hello, cousin
Hi.
Jonah.
Okay. Anyway, my mother was a Dresner, as you know. We had a catering hall in Crown Heights. And your grandparents, my Uncle Abe and Rose, would come practically every Sunday while the affairs were going on, and my mother would take them upstairs to the apartment and give them some lovely things to eat. That's my fond memory of my Uncle Abe and my Aunt Rose. Just want to leave you with one vertive. You can just listen to me. It's interesting that we always mention Hamakom Yonachem Eschem in the plural. We never say it in the singular, even though the funeral parlors put out the sign that if it's a female, Otach, if it's a male, Otcha. We always say it in the plural. And the reason is the Kadosh Baruch Hu, our creator, the God in heaven, is also sitting right next to you and mourning for my cousin Seymour. And therefore, we always say it in the plural to include the Kadosh Baruch Hu in his sitting with you to mourn.
Thank you for that. That's lovely.
Thank you, Jonah.
Dad loved his Aunt Fanny, just so you
Yeah.
know. Anybody else here? It's okay if not, we have a shot at actually being on time. So, so let me just give a preview then of what's going to happen Saturday night and Sunday, and then I'll let everybody go. Saturday night, our service will be led by Rabbi Or Rose of Hebrew College and of the Chatham Synagogue. He really loved our dad, and dad really loved him and admired him and respected him, as do I, and as you all will if you don't know him. And he's going to lead us, and then our dad's cousin, Ruti Kutz, from the Israeli Dresdner side of the family, because Dresner, after all, came from Dresden in Germany. And when they went to Ukraine, they were known as Der Dresdner, the one who came from Dresden. And somewhere along the line, the Dalet got dropped and they became Dresdner, but the Israeli side of the family put it back. And so Ruti Kutz was Ruti Dresdner, and she's going to be speaking along with her husband and their two kids on Saturday. On Sunday, Rabbi Lorge's colleague, Angela Bookdahl, whom I'm sure everyone knows at Central Synagogue, is going to be leading the final night of Shiva. And we're honored to have her leading us to finish things out. And we will be joined by one of Dad's cousins that night as a speaker, Jay Schuster. So it's kind of a family weekend, which seems fitting. And if anybody would like to speak then, you're welcome to. It'll be your last two opportunities to do so. Again, if you want to send something to us, avidresner7@gmail. All of the recordings for the funeral and all of the other nights of Shiva are available on the Temple Beth Tikva, Wayne, New Jersey website. And I think that's all the info you need to know. So again, thank you all. Thank you to Rabbi Lorge. Thank you to Rabbi Gendler, Rabbi Secher, and of course, Rabbi Young. So we greatly appreciate everything that you said tonight, everything that you stand for, everything that you are, and may you all continue to inspire us and make our Father's name a blessing, and make sure that what he lived for lives on in the world through you and through those that you inspire. And that goes for everybody here as well. We all have our part to play. So thank you. And good night.
And thank you, Dawn.
Yes, thank you, Dawn. Bye.